This week, the Rwandan embassy in Washington, D.C., together with members of the Rwandan diaspora in North America, organized events to remember the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. The main event took place at the Capitol Hill. Speakers, including U.S. Congressman Donald Payne, remembered the dark days in 1994 when the U.S. government refused to heed advice from congressional leaders like himself to act in stopping the killings in Rwanda.
I recall those days when we had the hearings and we asked our Assistant Secretary of State, who was actually in the film, was this genocide which was going on? And it was a word that should not seem like should be uttered in Washington, D.C. They talked it looked like it was very serious. Many lives were being lost. We are looking at what's going on, but the word genocide was avoided, totally avoided. And it was disgraceful that the killings just continued. And it had the UN contingent there with General Delier had been reinforced, we probably could have prevented the genocide, because at that time the genocideers were using machetes. They didn't have guns and rocket-propelled launchers and things of that nature, and a strong, assertive UN presence could have prevented the deaths, but no one was willing to move forward. And we in Congress continue to ask, what are we doing? The few of us that had strong concerns about it, but we got no response from the administration. And I do know, not that it helps the many victims who lost their lives, but when the President of the United States took the trip to Africa, was 12 days, 6 countries. Believe it or not, there was not on the agenda to stop in Rwanda. And I recall very vividly that I approached the administration and said, now, it's like going to Germany for the first time and not going to Auschwitz. Would you do that? Would an American president refuse to go to where the Holocaust happened in Germany? And I'm sure that every president of the United States has visited the centers where the atrocities happened in the Holocaust. And so I said, how can you go to Africa and fly over Rwanda and not stop to at least express the condolences? And there was a debate, and some in the administration did not want to go to Rwanda, but the stronger minds prevailed, and we went to Rwanda. And I was there when persons who were at the airport when we met Rwandans who lost loved ones, and persons who were injured themselves and acted as if they were dead, sometimes in pools of blood, but they survived, and they told their stories to President Clinton and our delegation of several members of Congress who was on that particular trip. And I do recall President Clinton clearly putting his notes down and saying that it was probably the worst situation that he's ever had as President of the United States, and that he actually apologized almost about what occurred. But what we have to remember is that we should not have let this happen again. We said never again after World War II, but we allowed it to happen again.
Rwandan ambassador to the U.S., James Chimonyo, said the world needs to draw lessons from this tragedy and must always pledge that it will never happen again anywhere in the world.
Therefore, important for all of us, with our friends and partners, to remain focused on this course of action. We must strive to make Rwanda a better place to live for all Rwandans, but also for the entire humanity.
Ambassador Mary Carlin Yates is a U.S. senior diplomat, a special assistant to the president, and senior advisor at the National Security Council. In her speech to the audience, Ambassador Yates tearfully recounted a time when she was informed of the killings in Rwanda during her tenure in neighboring Congo.
I was posted to the U.S. Embassy in Kinshasa, Zaire in the spring of 1994 when a friend, a journalist, a veteran VOA reporter, came into my office and tried to relate to me what he had witnessed in Rwanda the week before. The mass killings, the locked churches, children with machete cuts in their heads. He sat and he wept. After all these years, he wept, and I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't comprehend sitting in my office. But the Rwandan genocide had begun. And when my embassy sent me to Goma, Zaire, about 2 months later, during the inundation of about 1 million refugees, I saw firsthand the aftermath of conflict starting after mile of blood-stained clothes en route to Gisenyi. Those images are still seared in my brain. Excuse me. But I also had the privilege when in Burundi to watch Rwanda change. Rwanda exceeded all expectations. The country's ability to move beyond those dark days and reestablish a government working for its people has been truly remarkable. Economic development in Rwanda continues to be impressive, and there is peace in this society that could not have been expected when this tragedy ended. Rwanda's transition from this post-conflict society to one that is an important contributor to global peace and the global economy is further proof of its rebirth. Rwanda today is one of the world's 6th largest contributors to troops in international peacekeeping missions. That is quite remarkable. They have sent peacekeepers to in United Nations missions to Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Haiti.
Dr. Linda Melvin is the author of the book A Conspiracy to Murder. She was at the UN in the early days of the genocide and has done extensive research on the topic.
At dawn, 17 years ago today, several hundred Rwandan soldiers left their barracks near Kigali's airport and were assigned to nearby residential areas. Their orders were clear. They were to conduct a systematic house-to-house search, and they were to kill any person they found carrying a Tutsi identity card. And so they proceeded. As the sun came up that Thursday morning, roadblocks were in place to prevent escape. Some people had stayed awake all night. In Kigali's densely populated Gikondo, a young girl pleads with her parents to flee. There is no point, they tell her. It is over. They will kill us progressively, her mother says. The Hutu power militia are taking control of the streets. The Interahamwe is moving from house to house and killing whole families with machete. In the north, in Gisenyi, identified Tutsi families are taken away on lorries to a public cemetery known as the Commune Rouge, where they are killed.
Dr. Susan Allen from Emory University has been closely involved in trying to bring the people who committed the genocide to book. She warns that some of them live in the U.S.
When we fled Rwanda to Zambia and found that all around us were génocidaires who had fled also to Zambia, because Zambia was, at that time, a fairly hospitable place. It was far enough away. The government of Zambia didn't really know who was who. It was easy to fool them. The génocidaires pretended that they were survivors and actually became very close to high-level people in the government in Zambia because they're always very clever at disguising themselves this way. So when they heard that we and others from the Project San Francisco were in Zambia, because we had our peppy couples come and get tested for HIV announcements on the radio, and we kept our name. So they knew where to find us. And they came, one of the men who had been the Minister of Social Affairs in the genocidal government came to our AIDS research project in Lusaka and looked around and asked a bunch of questions, noticed that there were some Rwandans there that we had brought down, people who had fled with us. To the project in Zambia, and a few hours later a phone call came, close your project and go back to America or we'll kill all of you. And so we closed the project and we went to the Zambian police and we convinced them that this was a big problem, not just for us, not just for the Rwandans that we had brought to Zambia and for those of us working at the project, but really for Zambia, that these people could be very destabilizing to a country that had always been peaceful. Fortunately, we were able to get several members of the diplomatic corps involved, the German ambassador, Peter Schmidt, the Irish ambassador, and several others brought together a group of people and lobbied the Zambian government to actually investigate the death threats, which they did, and they identified a whole nest of génocidaires who were there, and arrested them, 18 of them. And at that point, the International Criminal Tribunal, which had been set up for Yugoslavia, had Rwanda added to its mandate, but hadn't indicted anyone yet from Rwanda. So they were notified by the government of Zambia, here, you've been asking for help, you've been making all of these please, please, world, help us. We have 18, come and get them. And the ICTR was caught off guard, I guess you could say, didn't answer the request from the government of Zambia. And so we began making preparations, those of us who had worked with the intelligence people and the immigration people and the diplomatic corps and all of these different moving parts to get these 18 guys arrested, decided, well, if the ICTR is not going to do their job, let's just ship them back to Rwanda. Rwanda's quite happy to have them. Zambia seems more than willing to turn them over. There's a mechanism for doing it. They were illegally in Zambia. We can just deport them. We don't need all of this messiness about is there or isn't there an extradition treaty and so on. The Zambians are convinced enough by all of these faxes of handwritten eyewitness testimonies that had been coming from Kigali to Lusaka, from people who heard that those who had murdered their families had been arrested. And so literally we got to the point where there was a chartered plane ready to take these guys from Lusaka to Kigali. And I'm a dual national of the United States and the Republic of Ireland, and so I was happy that it was Roan Air, proud Irish contractor, who was going to fly them back. And then all of a sudden the ICTR decided to get involved and said, well, hang on, maybe we do want some of these guys. And so brokering, all right, you guys get first dibs, take whoever you want, the rest will go back to Rwanda. So they took 3. The first 3 they ever got, the first 3 they ever convicted, came from the government of Zambia. And the other 15, the ICTR asked the government of Zambia to release, rather than sending them back to Rwanda. And the promise was, we will continue to investigate them, make them happy, give them work permits, let them stay here in Zambia so that our investigations can proceed. Well, you can guess what happened. None of those 15 got arrested. In fact, 3 of them made it into the United States. Only one of whom has been sent back. And since then, many others have managed to come. Zambia, as it turns out, became a throughway for these guys to get into the US, and some women. So I feel that while we have let Rwanda down in the time leading up to the genocide, when it could not have been clearer, I mean, the people who died that I worked with came to me and told me they were going to die. And they did, because we just didn't want to believe it. So now I look at what these génocidaires are doing when they're here in the United States. They're regrouping, they're very active, they're denialists. I'm sure you'll hear from our subsequent panelists much more about this. They're dangerous. And when I go back to Kigali now and I see the tremendous headway that Rwanda has made and what an amazing place it is, I still remember how fragile all of this can be, how it can just turn in a moment. And I speak to the people, the survivors, who say to me, look, you know, this is still like an open wound for us. Every time we hear that that man who was responsible for murdering our family is living in Paw Paw, Michigan, or Dayton, Ohio, teaching at a university, working for a non-governmental organization, preaching in a church. Every time we hear this and we ask ourselves, why isn't America doing something about these people? And those of you in the room who are in any position to have any influence over this, I can tell you the authorities here have been made aware, they have all of the information they need and more. They're simply not acting. And it's not putting any American lives at risk. It doesn't require really much money even. The Zambians managed to do it for very little, I can tell you that. And it doesn't put any American lives at risk. Why aren't we doing it? It's destabilizing, it's a threat, it's salt in the wound of people who've suffered enough. This time next year, I want to be able to say that 6 more have been shipped home. So, will you help me?